You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian here with my co-host, Matt. Coming to you a little later than normal. We're coming to you on January 14th of 2022, a Friday instead of a Tuesday as we're recording this. Just had some personal things between us both that kind of stopped us from being able to record on a normal schedule, but we still wanted to get an episode out this week. But this week we're going to dive into the Hall of Fame, make our own kind of ballots, with the announcement being next week right before we record, so we'll be able to bring who got in and who didn't. We do have a little bit of CBA news that they kind of negotiated, and we'll get a little bit into that before the Hall of Fame stuff. Before we get into all of that, how are you doing, Matt?
Doing all right. I'm just excited to talk about some Hall of Fame stuff. I kind of hate that the CBA thing's not working itself out so far, but um, definitely, definitely ready to talk some Hall of Fame, and so everything's going pretty well, and gonna been doing some watching some sports this week, watching a lot of basketball lately, so it's been fun. But ready to get on with the show here.
Yeah, it really is. The college basketball world's been really interesting the past couple weeks for sure. But let's go ahead and look just to what the CBA was that they we mentioned last week that they hadn't even had talks scheduled, but they actually ended up having, I think it was like a 45-minute or an hour long meeting yesterday, and the owners had given a proposal to the players. The players didn't really receive it too well. They focused on some of the issues with the younger players and the service time manipulation and kind of what arbitration or getting players the money a little earlier would look like. But the overall of the luxury tax issue that the players are wanting, or like the salary floors and stuff, that really was no movement on that. And just an overall didn't seem like the players were too thrilled with what the owners had brought to the table. So they're supposed to, within the next week or two, give a counter proposal, but still doesn't seem very encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they at least met, I guess, but yeah, definitely not a lot of movement. There's a lot of animosity. Um, I mean, some of the proposals are, at least they're kind of talking about some of the actual issues now. The surface time manipulation is a big issue, but I know that the MLB said that they were going to focus on that first, and then focus on the stuff like the luxury tax, which wasn't really a part of this offer. Um, later on, which there's not a lot of time for later on, but we'll see how that goes. So hopefully they counter with an offer pretty soon, and that'll be important, because they definitely need to get this um, moving in the right direction. In the next couple weeks, so they can hopefully get to spring training next month at without losing a large portion of spring training games. I'm sure if they lose a few spring training games, it's not gonna matter that much, but if we get to mid-February and it's not even close, then people are going to really start to get worried. So hopefully they kind of set a deadline and get things worked out. But we'll see. I guess this is kind of a step in the right direction, because they at least met, but which hadn't been done in a while. But still, it's still worrisome they're not even coming to agreement on anything right now. So hopefully they get moving pretty soon.
Yeah, hopefully they do. I mean, you're starting to get into the area where if this starts dragging on too long and they don't make major progress, that stuff might start getting threatened. I mean, we're halfway through January and neither side has even started to budge on anything yet. So they need to make some little headway on something at least. One of these big major deals, because it seems like there's 4 or 5 or 6 that even both sides are wanting to get stuff done on. So hopefully that does, but it is an encouraging sign, at least, that they met, and hopefully the players respond quickly and with an offer either next week or the week after to get this deal rolling even more. But let's go ahead, and we want to spend a majority of this episode talking about the Hall of Fame ballot overall, hitting on the names that are at least on it. We'll go alphabetically, of the guys, the normal ballot that everyone gets, and hit on who our ballots are. Maybe some players we're not going to spend too much time on, just mention that they're on here. But we'll just go ahead and start at the top of the list with the first name being Bobby Abreu.
Yeah, and so Bobby Abreu is somebody who I think is very underrated over the last, over his career in baseball history. He's a guy who, for from 1998 until 2004, put up over 5 wins above replacement every single year. He had a fantastic peak. Um, After that, his defensive numbers really hurt his wins above replacement totals, but he was still putting up great offensive seasons. He did do a little bit of DHing once he moved to the American League. But this is a guy who, you could pencil him in for somewhere between 20 and 30 home runs, and you could pencil him in from somewhere between 20 and 40 stolen bases. And he was always going to run a high walk rate and a high on base percentage. For his career, had a 395 on base percentage. Um, 475 slugging, hit 288 career home runs, 400 career stolen bases. This is a guy who is a very, very good player, and I actually have him as a guy I would vote for on my ballot because he put up a really good peak. His longevity was pretty good. Played for 18 years in the big leagues. Put up 59.8 career Fangraphs WAR, and but really it's that power speed combination he had, and the on base percentage makes him one of the best leadoff hitters of the last 20 years. So I really like Bobby Abreu, and I wanted to shout him out as somebody I would have put on my ballot. So
Yeah, Bobby Abreu is one of those guys that is close on one of my ballots, but if we're following the rules of being able to only vote for 10, he'd probably be that 11th or maybe 12th, 13th type guy. Um, just right off that ballot. The problem is this 2022 ballot's so stacked this year with people who are Hall of Fame talents. It's hard to get everyone in, but Bobby Abreu had a really good career, and hopefully as some of these guys clear off, he gets more of a look as a Hall of Famer for sure. But the next guy is one we'll both agree on, and probably the most well-known name on this ballot, and that's Barry Bonds.
yeah, so I mean, we don't really even need to discuss Barry Bonds as a player. I mean, 164 wins above replacement puts him second all time behind the Babe. 762 home runs is the record. Um, I think the most remarkable thing about Bonds is not the home runs, it's the on base percentage. 444 on base percentage, a 20% walk rate. Just insane numbers. He holds several records for on base walks, slugging percentage, and the home runs and the single season home run record. I think really the biggest thing to discuss with Bonds would be the steroids, and that's keeping him off of a lot of ballots. And I've gone back and forth on this a little bit through through the 10 years that these guys, Bonds and Clemens, being the two that are in their 10th year and their final year on the ballot. Um, but I've come to the conclusion that I do think I would vote for Bonds and Clemens, who we'll get to in a minute. But um, because I think that for one thing, even before Bonds really started with the steroids, he was probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, he when he was with Pirates, I don't think he was juicing, and he was probably a Hall of Fame caliber player already. But when he got to San Francisco, he got started juicing a little bit. It was just one of those things where after some reflection on everything, they really weren't checking these guys at that point. And I mean, who's to say that Bonds wasn't against juicing, and then these guys all are starting to, you know, juice, and he's like, well, if they're not going to enforce it, then I'm going to start doing it too. I mean, so it's kind of like the wild, wild west. So I do think I would put Bonds in my ballot for the reasons that you can't not vote for Bonds with his numbers, and even without the home run record, which I still think probably should have an asterisk by it. He's a Hall of Famer either way. So it would have been a 500, maybe even 600 home run guy even without the juice. So Bonds definitely I would vote for.
Yeah, Bonds deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He, like you said, even before the rumors of the steroids or even suspicion of it, he had a Hall of Fame level career in Pittsburgh before ever, you know, touching any of that stuff. And so he definitely deserves to be, on the Hall of Fame thing. He's somebody that from the first time he was on the ballot, I still thought that he should be a Hall of Famer. It's just hard, the way I kind of like look at the Hall of Fame. It's, can you tell the story of the game by people who are if you're in the Hall of Fame, can you tell the story of the game without mentioning them? And I don't think you can with Barry Bonds. Like he's a vital part of an era of baseball. So he definitely is a somebody that has to be in the Hall of Fame in my eyes, and I'm glad that he's finally trending that way. But we'll talk more about that next week. Um, excuse me. The next guy that we have on the ballot um, is a guy who's one of those borderline cases, kind of like what Bobby Abreu was, but that's Mark Burley.
Yeah, Mark Burley's a really interesting case. Now, I don't think I would put him on the ballot, but I mean, I think I would put him on the ballot. I don't think I'd vote for him, but very, very low strikeout, low walk guy. Um, always pitched. The funny thing about Mark Burley was the fact that he could throw. He was almost like the lefty Maddox. He just wasn't quite as good as Maddox, but he was. You could pencil him down for being a solid, you know, mid to upper rotation arm. He's always going to throw 200 innings. In fact, he threw 200 innings from 2001 till 2014, and 2015, his last season, he threw 198 innings, which is just remarkable in this day and age. Um, and his peripherals were a little inconsistent, or were pretty consistently upper threes, low fours. With his peripherals, his FIP and XFIP, and then his ERA was kind of relative to that, maybe a little bit lower. Um, in his career, over 3,000 innings, a 381 ERA, which is really nice. 214 wins, which for a lot of the more old-fashioned people is important. Um, you look at his, he threw a perfect game. He's a world champion in 2005 with the White Sox. He threw another no-hitter. I mean, he's a guy who and he has a unique part of the game with his style of being a guy who threw low pitch counts, threw really fast, like not fast as in pitch speed, but like he threw his games like he could pitch a game in 2 hours. I mean, he was up there ready to go, throw, and I think that was really cool about him. There's a a fun video on YouTube from a baseball. From a Foolish Baseball that about Mark Burley that everyone should check out. It was pretty cool about how quickly he could throw a game. Um, but um, but I think he just falls off my ballot. I just don't think his peak was quite what needs to be in the Hall of Fame. And a 381 ERA would be one of the worst ERAs for pitchers in the game. I think his biggest thing was just his durability, and I just don't know if he has the peak to be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he like I said, he was one of those borderline guys that you could make a little bit of a case for, but odds on he's gonna not be a guy that many people are even voting for. I believe right now he's even under the percentage of being able to stay on the ballot for next year. Um, but I do think he was a little underappreciated at times. Like you said, he was very good, and I think he's kind of more of one of the underrated guys. Um, but not somebody that's gonna be able to make the Hall of Fame. But the next guy that we have on the list is, one of those other controversial names, as you mentioned with Barry Bonds, but that's Roger Clemens. A guy who is known around for taking the steroids, but he pitched like 24 years in the majors, 354 wins, a career, um, three, or yeah, career 3.12 ERA. Uh, just a guy who, like I said, he's one of the best pitchers of all times, even with or without steroids. I think he took him to kind of, you know, longevity his career, and he had a career year. One of his career years in 2005 at the age of 42, which you could probably benefit to steroids, but overall, I think he's a guy that he's too good, even considering what the steroids was in that era of the game. Um, to not be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I definitely don't think Roger Clemens is quite as much of a shoe in, when you consider the steroids as Barry Bonds is. But Roger Clemens, I think should be in. He's a guy who you look at his just counting stats, third all time in strikeouts, behind Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson. Um, had a career 3.12 ERA and 3.09 FIP, which means that he was actually a little bit unlucky over his career. Probably had some poor defense behind him at times, but 133.7 wins above replacement. You could probably shave off a little bit of that at the end of his career because of the steroids were definitely going to help him get past, his age 30, mid 30s career. But even before that, he was a Hall of Famer. Um, a great pitcher. Obviously just the power pitcher, strike anybody out. Didn't walk a ton of guys for his career. Um, just one of the best pitchers of all time, and he definitely is a guy who probably, regardless of the steroids, would have been a shoe in anyways. So, um, I think that he and the fact that everyone he was pitching to in those late '90s, early 2000s era was probably juiced up as well. So, um, I definitely think that Roger Clemens needs to be in, even though I don't really like him. I mean, he had some outbursts that were a little bit on the shady side, like when he threw that bat at Mike Piazza. So that was not a good look, but definitely should be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely, he should be. The next couple guys on the list are guys that probably we were fan favorites of, as we were growing up, but just not quite good enough to make it onto the Hall of Fame ballot. But that's Carl Crawford and Prince Fielder.
Yeah, Carl Crawford was a good player. Had some really good years, especially with the Rays. A base stealer, 480 stolen bases, had 58 stolen bases in '06. 50 in '07, 55 in '03, 59 in '04. Just a guy who was just a great, great base stealer, a good defensive player as well. For most of his career, ended up, going to Boston and then LA at the end of his career. Um, just not quite enough juice in his bat to put him up there much higher. And the longevity, maybe not quite as much too. Only played 14 seasons, which is a lot, but he retired at age 34. Um, was really starting to wane down at the end of his career. Did have a great peak, but his counting stats only 41 wins above replacement for his career. He's not really quite at the level of some of these other guys that are in the ballot.
Yeah, and then looking at a guy like Prince Fielder, he's probably a guy who was hurt by the injury bug later on in his career. If he would have been able to continue on, he's probably a guy that we would have been able to look closer at. In some of his years in Milwaukee, he had the 50 homer season in 2007, another in 2009, 46 homers, 141 RBIs, career 319 homers. He was a guy early on in the career that was really durable. I mean, he played 157 games from 2006 to 2013. With 2009 um, through 2013, he missed a total of one game through that entire stretch. And then he ended up starting dealing with a neck injury in Texas in 2014. He only played 42 games, and then 15 he played 158 again, but his power was zapped. Really, he only got to 23 that year. Then was forced to retire early at the age of 32 in 2016.
Yeah, Prince Fielder's a guy who, he would have been a really interesting Hall of Fame case because I think that there's a chance if he had played for 5, 6 more years, he could have gotten to 500 homers and been a member of the 500 homer club. But his defense was so bad at first base, and then eventually he would have definitely moved to DH full time. I think that would have held his overall numbers back. I think he would have been like a David Ortiz type case though, where he's probably getting in regardless. Would have been probably considered a career type DH, unlike even though he played a lot more position than David Ortiz did. But I definitely like Prince Fielder. I think that he would have probably gotten closer to being a Hall of Famer if he had stayed healthy for 5, 6 more years. But 11-year career. The longevity wasn't really there. He really didn't take off in the big leagues till 2007 as well, which, he was age 23, and his decline really started at age 29 after his age 29 season. So he really had a good peak, but it was just 6 years. And as a first baseman, he hit really well, obviously, but, he only put up 27 wins above replacement for his career. Um, 319 homers is nice, but I mean, it's a tough case to put him in the Hall of Fame because of just longevity. So
Yeah, that really does hurt his case. But next guy that we're going to talk about is Todd Helton, a guy who I think he's probably that 11th guy, like I talked about with Bobby Abreu. Helton's probably the guy that I want to put on the ballot the most. I'm trying to find a spot for him. Um, you know, I think if he were able to put up these stats outside of Coors Field, then he would be, a for sure Hall of Famer. But I think that people just take the Coors Field effect, um, a little too far. Like, to me, it's a place that is in the Major League Baseball. Yeah, sure, the ball carries, but it's also the biggest park in the league. Why are we penalizing somebody for something that we allow to happen? Like with the DH as well. Yeah, sure, they don't play defense, but they're it's still a spot that we have in the game. So why should somebody be penalized for being really great at that? Like Helton was a really good first baseman, and part of it is being taken because, oh well, you play in the thing where the ball carries a little too much, and I don't think that's fair at all.
Yeah, I mean, Helton's the guy that he's on my radar. A few of these guys getting off the ballot next year, whether it's from this being their final year or from them, getting into the Hall of Fame. He might be a guy that would be a ninth or 10th next year, but his case is really good. 300 average, 400 on base, 500 slugging. There's not many guys that had that line that are not in the Hall of Fame. But you look at him as a first baseman who played in Coors, and you know that is going to hurt his case a little bit because, for one thing, if you look at his career batting average on balls in play, that is very high, which a lot of times is partially due to having such a big field, um, and having a lot more space for balls to drop in the outfield, and then obviously hit more home runs being in Coors as well. So his if his case was solely due to home runs, the it would be like Coors wouldn't be quite as big of a deal because, but you also got to remember too that some of these were before they had the humidor there too, and the ball was just absolutely crazy flying out in the early 2000s. And after 2004 2005, when they kind of toned it down a little bit with that, his home run totals dropped drastically. Now, he was still a very good hitter for those years, but he wasn't quite as good as he was in the early career. So I think Todd Helton's a very interesting case. He had a peak of 2000 to 2004, 2005 maybe even, that was definitely Hall of Fame worthy and had some longevity, has some counting stats, but he just misses for me as well. Just barely off, but he's a guy who has a chance to get on next year maybe.
Yeah, he like there's a good chance that he gets a better push in the next couple years, especially with these crowded ballots getting kind of cleared out. But the next group of guys is another one that really doesn't make either one of our ballots, and that's Ryan Howard, Tim Hudson, and Torrey Hunter.
Yeah, I'll start with Ryan Howard. He's a guy that, for the Phillies had a couple really good years. His counting stats with the 382 home runs, that's pretty nice. But, I mean, career 28% strikeout rate, only had 12 seasons in the big leagues, but really, his first one was only 19 games, the second was only 88 games. So, he really only had about 10 years in the big leagues, and then his last like 5 years were awful. So he had a peak of 2 or 3 years where he was one of the better hitters in the game, but he only had one season above 135 WRC plus as well. So in 2006, the year he hit 58 homers. So this is a guy that he had his peak. He was pretty good. He played a big role on a couple of really good Phillies teams that won the World Series, but um, you know, I mean, he put up sub 20 WAR for his career, so I definitely don't think I think he's probably one of the weaker cases on this ballot.
Yeah, and there's also going to be that little bit of like a what if he had never hurt his Achilles, like what would he have been able to get to, counting stats wise and that because he really wasn't the same player after that Achilles injury, um, and it would have been interesting to see what he might have been able to be, but looking at a guy like Tim Hudson, who's right there, is he was a guy who is a really good pitcher for a long time. I mean, he played 17 years in the league at 222 wins, a 3.49 ERA, which is, really good as well, over 3,000 innings. I think the thing that's going to kind of just hurt him is that there were so many other people on the ballots that he just didn't get, as good of a look that he probably should have got. I mean, a career 378 FIP even. I mean, that's still really good as well. An ERA plus of 120 for the career. It is baffling to me that he doesn't have more support, but I could kind of see it with the how loaded the ballots are and how many people it's hard to get everyone on.
Yeah, Tim Hudson's a guy that for me he's a special player because I'm as an Auburn grad, he's an Auburn guy that played for Auburn and and when he got to the pros, he went to my favorite pro team after his first 5 years. After that he went to Atlanta for a long time. So um he's a guy that I pulled for a long time, being a Brave and an Auburn guy, but he he's a great pitcher. Put up a really good career, 16 years. He's actually the current hitting coach at Auburn. I mean, pitching coach at Auburn, which is pretty cool. But um, he's probably the definition of Hall of very good. Long career, very solid pitcher. Had some really good years. But he's just not quite. I just don't think he was quite enough of a strikeout pitcher and not quite dominant enough to eclipse the threshold. I think you look at his 48.9 career wins above replacement on Fangraphs. It's really nice. Through a lot of innings, he's a great innings eater. And he had a good ERA. 3.49 ERA is solid. 200 wins. But he's not quite there when it comes to Hall of Famers. You're talking about like Clemens and guys like that, and he's just not quite there. He's kind of in the same tier for me as Mark Burley. He's very similar to me, but I definitely like Tim Hudson. He's definitely worth talking about, and I'm glad he made more than 1 year on the ballot too.
Yeah, I am as well. Another guy that is probably in that hall of very good, and maybe could be one of those more borderline if you look down deeper into it. That's Torrey Hunter. You're talking about a 9-time Gold Glover, really known for his defense. I think there was a stretch where he won it for what I think 9 years in a row is actually when he ended up winning. I don't think he missed a year. Right there, it still has 353 career home runs, only a 277 batting average, but a 50 career WAR, which probably misses the the line for most people. 19-year career, just one of those guys, like you said, a hall of very good, and in a certain year maybe he gets a little bit more attention, but just not right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Torrey Hunter's very similar. He's just not quite Hall of Fame worthy, but he's very good. He's worth talking about. I don't think he quite had the peak. He was a solid player for a long time, but I mean, he never put up a season over 5 WAR, which is pretty typical of what you need a few of those for the Hall of Fame case. But I mean, it's not a knock on him. He was a very good player, very consistent from 2001 until all the way up until 2013. He put up over 2 wins above replacement every single season, and he typically put up over 3, which is a really solid number. And that's a very 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 consistent player. So somebody you can count on every year. Hit 20 home runs ish, 20 to 30. Steal 20 or so bases, play good defense in the outfield. Hit over 270 ish, to somewhere between 270 and 290. Didn't walk a ton, but hit some home runs, hit for some slugging. Uh, be an above average hitter, defender, and base runner. I mean, he's just a good player, but maybe not quite Hall of Fame player.
Yeah. The next guy that is on the list that we have is a guy who we both have on our Hall of Fame ballots, and that's Andrew Jones.
Yeah, so Andrew Jones is a guy that, it's one of those situations where what if I told you that the greatest center fielder, defensive center fielder of all time hit 430 home runs? Would you consider that a Hall of Famer? And I think most people would say, yeah. But for whatever reason, he hasn't drummed up the support that I think he deserves. Now, his peak was unbelievable from 1997, which was his first year in the big leagues, up until 2007. He was one of the best players in baseball. Put up over 7 WAR twice. Put 6.9 one other year. Nice. Sorry, put up 7 WAR 3 times. Hit 51 home runs in 2005, which is the Braves record holder. The batting average at 254 was just a little bit low, but He did walk a lot. He got on base at 340 clip, 486 slugging, was an above average hitter for his career, a 111 WRC plus. But the defense, just greatest of all time defensively in center field. I think the thing that probably hurts him the most is his last 4 or 5 seasons, with the Dodgers, Rangers, White Sox, and Yankees were not very good. And that's really probably what hurts him, because I think that, two of those large media markets, or really all three of those being super large media markets, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago, not playing well when he was there really, really hurts him in a lot of people's eyes. But I definitely think Andrew Jones is a no doubt Hall of Famer. 67 WAR. There's not many players that are over 60 WAR that are not in the Hall of Fame, and I think it'd be a travesty to keep him out of it. But he has drummed up a pretty good amount of support over the last couple of years compared to what he had been having. And he's getting closer. I think he's probably going to end up over 50% this year. And with some of the guys that are falling off the ballot, I think that Andrew Jones will gain a lot of votes that those guys are, no longer gonna have from being off the ballot. So I definitely think Andrew Jones ends up getting a nod here in the next few years. But um, this is a guy that really should be in, and I mean I'm pretty adamant about that. So.
No, he absolutely does deserve to be in that stretch you said of those 10 years, where he was absolutely insane defensively, and everyone wants to say his decline happened so fast and so rapidly, but when you go around and look at it, I mean, if you look back at the highlight tapes the guy was doing, for those 10 years defensively in center field, he was throwing his body around like a rag doll. Like it was eventually about to break down and just not give him as much as what it had for that that age 19 to age 29 seasons or whatever. Um, but over 400 home runs, 10 career gold gloves. Like you said, the batting average might be a little low, but he walked enough to have a higher on base percentage. A guy who absolutely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame 100%. But the next guy on the list is somebody that I'm pretty adamant should be in the Hall of Fame, and that's Jeff Kent. He's one of the all-time best second basemen. I think he has the most homers in all time for second baseman. A guy who was 290 batting average, 377 homers, 2,461 hits, a 356 on base, so he still walked quite a bit as well. An MVP as well. The thing that really hurts him is the defense. He wasn't a great defender, and also I think another thing that hurts him was that he really wasn't a great personality, and he was really rude and brash with the media at times, and that in a popularity contest where in these voting sometimes that voters or old school media, if they don't if you weren't nice or kind to them, they could really hold you hostage here. And there is a part of that some of the insiders have even said that they've talked that people do have that, but he's I don't know why he doesn't have as much of a backing. I think he's only at like 30% right now, and he's on his ninth year in the ballot or something. So it's going to be a travesty that Jeff Kent doesn't make it, but a guy who absolutely should be there.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. He's a guy that I probably would put on my ballot next year with the guys that drop off. I think the thing that, like you said, the thing that holds him back probably is his defense, especially later in his career. But he had a great career. 377 homers is impressive from a second baseman. Um, he was close to the 290 average, 356 home base, 500 slugging is really solid. 500 slugging percentage for his career from second base is incredible. 56 wins above replacement is on Fangraphs is really nice. Um, I mean, I think, like I say, he's easily my number 11. I think he's ahead of Todd Helton for me. He's my number 11, but um, and I think next year a couple of the guys that I would vote for fall off the ballot, so I would vote for him next year because he'll be one of those that replaces them. He just got another year on the ballot, so. But we'll see. Hopefully he gets in, but he has to drum up a lot of support next year to get over the hump.
Absolutely. So the next guy that we're going to talk about he had probably one of the crazier stretches we ever saw and then fell off really hard, but that's Tim Lincecum. If you look at when he came in 2008, 2009, 2010, in 2011. That 4 year stretch he was the best pitcher in baseball. I mean, 3 of those 4 years had a sub 3 ERA. Had overall in his career, he had 110 games that he won. But you look at that 18, 15, 16, and 13, and then from then on, he had upper fours ERAs. Um, the FIPS were didn't back that as much, but a guy who he was called the freak for a reason. In that 4 year stretch was amazing, but just after that, he just doesn't have the longevity or the career after those kind of 4 years to really back a Hall of Fame worthy candidacy.
Yeah, you absolutely hit that perfectly. I mean, he was just unbelievable for like 3 years, 4 years, and then after that, just nowhere close. I mean, he was, with his mechanics that he had, which were really unique, just didn't last long term. And I mean, guy who was a great pitcher. I mean, he pitched for 4 years, but um, one of the best pitchers we've ever seen for 4 years. But you can't, you got to have more longevity than that to be considered a Hall of Fame case. I mean, his 27.5 wins above replacement kind of shows that, but the thought that he put up 27.5 wins above replacement, with most of it being in 4 years, is pretty incredible. So, shout out to Tim Lincecum. He's a great pitcher, and I think he's going to miss just about everybody's ballot. I doubt he's back next year, but he's a guy who is definitely fun to watch and definitely deserving of being on the ballot, but not not somebody that anybody's really going to vote for. I don't think.
Yeah, not really. The next person we have is Justin Morneau. First baseman. He had a good career. I think he's right in that Hall of Good is very good, or I really messed that up right there. A Hall of Very Good, not a Hall of Fame worthy player. He only has 27 wins above replacement, but 247 career home runs, a 281 batting average. He is a former MVP. I also there's one thing I don't know how many people actually have this, but he in 2008 he was one of players to play in 163 games because they had the extra game at the end of the year and he played in that as well. So I found that interesting. He'll also be a person that what if he had never battled the concussions? He was a guy who battled that a lot. So what would he have been able to do counting stats wise had he not been able to or had not had that health issue and battled those.
Yeah, I mean Justin Morneau was a good player, won an MVP. Um, his best year was really 2010, where he only played 81 games, but he put up 5 WAR in 81 games and had a 345 average, a 437 on base, and a 618 slugging with 18 home runs in half a season, which is pretty crazy. But um, he's a good player. I mean, not too much else to say about him. He's kind of in the category of like Brian Howard, is guys who had a really good peak, had a couple good years. I think he was a good player for longer than Ryan Howard, but didn't have quite the same peak. But obviously Justin Morneau is a great player and definitely worthy of some talk. But he definitely misses the Hall of Fame mark for sure.
Yes, the next guy we have on here is a relief pitcher. It's gonna be the first one that we've actually talked about, but that's Joe Nathan.
Yeah, and for me, I guess my philosophy on relief pitchers is that they have to be like greatest relief pitcher of all time type people to make my Hall of Fame ballot. Like, as in, like they need to be like super high up there. And Joe Nathan is close. He's definitely got a case, but I think he's just slightly below it. And one other thing um for relief pitchers for me too is that they really need to have that postseason resume too. For relief pitchers typically are guys who a lot of regular season stats don't matter quite as much for them, and Joe Nathan really didn't have much of a postseason resume. Um, so maybe 2012 with the Rangers, but um, I think that if I look at Joe Nathan, I think of a really good reliever who had some fantastic years, put up over 3 WAR a couple times in his career. 19.5 wins above replacement for his career is really, really, really good for a reliever. And he just misses he probably is my number 2 reliever on the ballot, maybe number 3, but um, it's hard for relievers to get in the Hall of Fame for me just because of the fact that they don't pitch as many innings and they're a lot more volatile. So it takes a really special reliever for me to want to vote for him. And I think Joe Nathan is a special reliever, but I don't think he's quite at that level of some of the guys who, or would get in for me.
Yeah, that's pretty much. He's a really good reliever. I just don't think he's a Hall of Fame level reliever. And we'll talk about one of those here just a little bit. But I think the next guy we're going to talk about is probably the easiest for both of us on this ballot, and that's David Ortiz. Um, you know, 541 career homers. A career of 20 years. Obviously we know him most for being in Boston, but started his career in Minnesota, a 10-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion, 7-time Silver Slugger, a 380 on base with a 286 batting average. Being a DH is what hurts the overall WAR number, only at 55.3, but yeah, I think everyone knows Big Poppy, and you got to have him on the Hall of Fame ballot.
Yeah, so he's not quite as easy for me as he is probably for you. I mean, obviously, I like Big Poppy, and I think I would vote for him. But um, you know, the whole DH thing does hit people for me because one way I look at DH is if they were capable of playing a position, but they were put at DH because they needed to shift somebody around, then it doesn't hurt as much for me as, you know, this guy absolutely could not play the field and he had to be a DH type guy because just value wise. But I mean, it's going to be hard to keep out a guy with 541 home runs, hit 286, 380, 552 for his career. And the fact that it's David Ortiz and, you're talking about the Hall of Fame, and there hadn't been really too many more famous baseball players than David Ortiz, just in general. I mean, he's probably he exemplifies that part of the game, and obviously just as a hitter, I mean, there's very few that were ever better. I mean, 140 WRC plus for his career. um and with having all that negative defensive value and base running, still put up over 50 WAR. But um it definitely takes a special DH for me to want to put a pretty much all-time DH in the Hall of Fame. Edgar Martinez was one, and I think this is the number two one to go in for me. He has to be in there. So
Yeah, he does. It kind of jumps back to the can you tell the story of an era of baseball without the player. Can you tell that with David Ortiz? And I don't know that you can. Like you said, he's one of the most famous players, and playing in Boston obviously helps that. But you know, he's more of a slam dunk for a lot of people, and even for me, just being able to him being one of the most feared hitters of our generation per se. But the next list of guys or next kind of group of guys here is we'll just kind of gloss over them. Neither one or none of them really are big or big on the ballot this year, and probably most likely going to fall off. But Jonathan Papelbon, had a really good stretch as a closer as well. Jake Peavy was one of the best starters in the game for a stretch of his career as well. Andy Pettit, longevity there, was a World Series champion. Played a lot of time with the Yankees and the Astros, and then AJ Pierzynski, who for a catcher is probably good, but I don't know that he could be in the Hall of Fame.
yeah, I'll go through those kind of briefly. Really, the only one out of the three that has any case would be Pettit, but I think a lot of his success was tied up to the steroids because his success was longevity and being able to pitch till he was like 41. Um, and I mean, he was just really on a rate basis, a 3.85 ERA would be one of the worst in the Hall of Fame. But you look at Papelbon, I think we kind of summed up him with what we talked about on Joe Nathan. The only difference with Papelbon is he might be a little bit higher than me than Joe Nathan because of the postseason success, closing out World Series and stuff. But
Oh, I
um,
thought you were going to say because he choked out Bryce Harper.
well, I was gonna say, yeah. Well, I was gonna say, but he's gonna be hurt a lot by that kind of
Yeah,
thing, by being a kind of a head case. So
yeah.
that's gonna hurt him. Jake Peavy is kind of more in that like Tim Hudson slash Mark Burley, like Hall of Very Good. Like he was a really solid, he was a really solid pitcher for a long time. Did a good job. One of my favorites, but not quite, Hall of Fame worthy. Um, and then of course you look at AJ Pierzynski as a guy who just a long term catcher that probably wasn't quite a Hall of Fame caliber player just because The fact that he's a long-term catcher really got him on the ballot, but um, that longevity helps. But definitely the only one that has a case really is Pettit, and I probably would not go with Pettit just because of the PED issues, plus the fact that he was not, on a rate basis, he was not that good. Like he was good, but not that good. So
Yeah, well, let's jump on to the last column, at least looking at the ballot wise. And a guy I know that I have on the ballot, and you don't for different reasons, but that's Manny Ramirez. He's a guy that 312 batting average, a 411 on base, 585 slugging, you know 555 career homers, 69.3 WAR, a 12-time All Star, 9-time Silver Slugger. You know, he's one of those players that I think he was an enigma at the time, but he's a player that just was so good. But at the same time, was he good because of his pure talent, or was he good because he's was taking steroids? And he's a guy who, unlike where Bonds or that, where after it was kind of cracked down on, he was still tested and tested positive and suspended for it, while still playing. So that definitely does hurt his case. But for me, a player like Manny Ramirez and what he does have, in the counting stats region, I think it's just too good to pass up to not be able to put him in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's one of those players to me that helps tell the story of what the game of baseball was at that, 90s and 2000s.
yeah, and like as you mentioned, the steroid suspension is what does it for me with him. I had always been somebody who was anti PED guys, but I kind of talked myself out of it. But the guys who actually tested positive when MLB was enforcing the rules and got suspended, to me, are guys who are cheaters and shouldn't be in it. So that's just kind of my stance on it. If they, and if they got caught actually, abusing the abusing steroids and using them, and you know, then I think they shouldn't be in. So that's just kind of my stance on it. But um,
Well, that stance will, I mean, just let it roll into the next one, and that's Alex Rodriguez. Is that kind of the same scenario with him as well for you?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, even more so with Alex Rodriguez. I mean, Manny Ramirez is a guy who, 66.3 WAR, was a horrible defensive player. So there's reasons to, but Alex Rodriguez obviously is a guy who one of the greatest players of all time when it comes to statistics. But I mean, a guy who did cheat, got a huge suspension. And I mean, I can't put Alex Rodriguez in. I mean, he was an obvious cheater because he was doing it while it was fully against the rules. It was enforced, and everyone knew it was against the rules at that time. And he was cheating, and he was doing it. So I can't put him in either.
And see, he's a guy that I still do have in. Um, I just think he was too good of a player even beforehand, before the suspension and everything, that he had a Hall of Fame level career. Kind of like what that's Barry Bonds. Is that because he was doing the steroids the entire time? I don't know. But, a guy, you're still looking at a guy who has 117 career WAR, was, really good defensively as a shortstop, and then moving over to third base to begin with. I know it fell off later on, but 696 home runs, 295 batting average. I mean, over 300 stolen bases, 330 on base, a 550 slugging. I mean, he's still a guy that I just feel still had a good enough career, um, given everything, that you can't really afford to not have him in the Hall of Fame in my eyes. And I know that my eyes doesn't really matter, but to me, Alex Rodriguez should be a Hall of Famer. But looking on the list, the next guy I think is a guy we both do actually agree on, that should be a Hall of Famer, and that's Scott Rowland.
Yeah, Scott Rowland to me is a guy who is a little bit similar to Andrew Jones with the case because he, defensive metrics are huge for him. He was a great defensive player, third base. Um, played for a long time, put up really good numbers at the plate as well. Just a guy who was an all-around great player. 316 home runs, a 122 career WRC plus, and fantastic metrics defensively. I mean, I almost 70 WAR on Fangraphs. I mean, he's a guy who should be in easily, and him and Andrew Jones are real similar as great defensive players who hit well as well, who hit well too. I mean, I don't understand why either one of them should be left out. Scott Rowland's a great player and he should be in.
Absolutely, he should be one of the defensive wizards, and a guy who, like you said, over 300 career home runs. He should absolutely be in, and it's a shame that he hasn't got more love earlier on. That it's being pushed to one of his later years on the ballot. But the next guy on the list is Jimmy Rollins. A former MVP, but a guy who 470 stolen bases. But if you start looking at the 264 on base, or not on base, 264 batting average, 231 career homers, 47.6 WAR on Baseball Reference. Just probably one of those Hall of very good guys, but just never good enough to warrant a real Hall of Fame case.
Yeah, Jimmy Rollins is a great player, and had some really really good seasons. 470 stolen bases is nice, but it's a defense base running type guy. You know, he was a below average hitter for his career, although some of that was tied to his last 4 years where he had an 84, 103, 80, and 71 WRC plus. But had some good offensive years, but really for his career below average hitter. Um, a pretty low on base percentage at 324, would be one of the lower ones in the Hall. Um, 418 slugging is not anything to really overcome that. And 49.4 wins above replacement is really nice. Good defensive player, obviously playing shortstop at a pretty high level. Great base runner. I just don't think Jimmy Rollins is quite on the Hall of Fame tier, but he's close. And he's got a case. He should stay on the ballot, but he's not Hall of Famer to me.
Yeah, he should be on the ballot, and he should get a little bit more talking. I know I've mentioned it a lot, but this ballot's so stacked that I don't know if he's going to be able to get that or not. He's at 11% right now, but not sure with what the anonymous votes will be like. But the next guy on our list is Kurt Schilling, a guy who I absolutely think that should be in the Hall of Fame. But a lot of his off field, especially after his playing career, kind of is being hindered a lot by that.
Yeah, Kurt Schilling's a guy who, I mean, he put up 80 wins above replacement as a pitcher. He's the second best pitcher on the Hall of Fame ballot. I mean, had some phenomenal seasons, phenomenal moments in his career. Was on the Boston Red Sox World Series team in 2004. They broke the curse. He was on the World Series team for the Diamondbacks. Had the bloody sock game. One of the best strikeout to walk ratios of all time. He's a guy who I think should be in the Hall of Fame. Um, I think he was an asshole off the field. I think a lot of people don't like him for his political beliefs, but
Yep.
I think the off field, there's other off field issues too that are holding him back. But I think it's pretty. I think that if you're going to put some of these guys in who have off field issues that are a lot less that are a lot more severe than Kurt Schilling's, then I think that you should put Kurt Schilling in. I mean, this guy had 79.8 wins above replacement as a pitcher. I mean, that's a really good number. And a 3.46 career ERA, over 200 wins. I just don't understand how you can't put him in the Hall of Fame. But he said he didn't want to be on the ballot anymore. I think that's kind of just trying to be against the writers who don't like him. But I mean, he should be in.
Yeah, he really should be. A guy that I believe you have on your ballot and I don't. He's just um, right outside of me in that group of the 3 or 4 right there, that I absolutely would vote for if I had the space. But that's Gary Sheffield. A guy 292 batting average, 393 on base, 514 slugging, 509 career home runs. Um, played 22 years in the big league, so he has the longevity wise. Why do you think that he doesn't get as much of a push for the Hall of Fame?
Well, I think he's a suspected steroid guy who was one of those like super good offensive but bad defensive corner outfielders. Um, I think that's really the reason. But he's kind of like the Manny Ramirez. I think the biggest difference for me is that Gary Sheffield never got suspended for steroids. He never got tested positive. He was one of the suspected late 90s, early 2000s steroid era users, but he never actually was tested positive. But I mean, on my ballot, he's going to be a Hall of Famer because he hit 292 average, 393 on base, 514 slugging percentage, 141 WRC plus, 62 wins above replacement for his career. and he's in the 500 home run club. I mean, and this is a guy who also had a great peak. In 2003 for Atlanta, 7.3 WAR, 6.6 for Los Angeles in 2000. Had some really good seasons. Was a long-term, really solid player, an all-star level player for many years in a row. I mean, he was a world champion with the Miami Marlins. So, um, I mean, I think Gary Sheffield should be a Hall of Famer based on that. But, I think there's an argument to be made that he wouldn't be because of the steroid era and having been a suspected user and the fact that his career is not quite like a Bonds or Clemens type, like he's one of the all-time greats type things. That Andy was a steroid era guy. I think there's an argument to be made against him, but I'd probably put him in there. So
Yeah, the steroid guys, it is hard, especially with you being suspected and not, and who actually did. It just feels like we're going to have to talk about that a lot. I mean, especially even with the next guy being Sammy Sosa on the list, a guy who has 609 career homers, um, a 344 on base, a 534 slugging with a 273 batting average. And then you look and he's on his last year of eligibility, and as of right now, he's tracking at like 25%. And he's a guy who I think should be, at least in that group of have the conversation and probably should be a Hall of Famer. But he probably is being hurt by more being kind of a steroid guy as well.
yeah, so Sammy Sosa is an interesting case because he has a lot less tied to steroids than a lot of the other guys on the list. In fact, his tie to steroids is exactly the same as David Ortiz's tie to steroids. But I think a lot of people suspect him because all of a sudden, mid-career, 1998, he all of a sudden started hitting for way more power. Like he had already hit for power the 3 years before that, but I mean, he started hitting 60 home runs every year, which is unreal. But his case is, he only had a 124 WRC plus for his career, which is interesting. I mean, a lot of it being lack of own base, lack of doubles. Um, but he hit 600 home runs, and his tie to steroids was a lot less than some of the other guys that people are voting for. So I mean, I think you kind of have to put him in 609 home runs. I mean, come on. Like
Yeah,
if
no,
you don't, if you're gonna put Ortiz in, they have the same tie to steroids. I will say one thing that Sammy Sosa had the cork bat incident too, which was
yeah.
pretty rough. But still, I'd put him in.
Yeah, he is a guy that at least deserves consideration. And it is a shame that being on his last year on the ballot, he's not getting more of that. So hopefully, one of those committees, takes a longer look at Sammy. We're getting down to the last couple names on this list, but the next one we have is Mark Teixeira. He's probably one of those guys as well that are on the Hall of Very Good, and you could tell a lot of what he stories about the game with him being on some good teams, especially with that Yankees, that late 2000s Yankees teams into the early 2010s. But just a guy who probably doesn't have the overall counting numbers. You're looking at 268 batting average, which probably doesn't do it, but a 360 on base, a 509 slugging, and he still does have over 400 home runs.
Yeah, and Teixeira was also a very good defensive first baseman to go along with it. But yeah, I mean, he's Hall of Very Good. Again, I mean, he's kind of like Todd Helton to me. He had a little bit less WAR, his hitting stats weren't quite as good, but he also wasn't playing in cores. So I mean, he's a very good player. I mean, but he just doesn't quite make the cut. 45 wins above replacement for his career. Just he's a very good player, just doesn't quite make the cut. So.
Yeah. The next guy that we have on here is Omar Vizquel. Probably one of the best defensive players of all time. Played 24 years in the league. I mean, 11-time Gold Glover, but the counting stats, just the offensive profile, just isn't there at all.
Yeah, I mean he would easily be one of the worst offensive players in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he had 83 WRC plus, well below average. Um, really a poor hitter. He did put up a pretty good amount of of counting stats offensively just because he played for so long that he got a lot of hits. Um, but and obviously a great defensive player for his career, and that should never be taken away from him. But 42 wins above replacement. Um, I just I don't think he's Hall of Fame worthy. He also has the off the field domestic battery issue that probably needs to be brought up now with this. That's kind of a pretty reliable, accusation. So I just don't think he's really that close for me. I know a lot of people actually voted for him, but he's lost a lot of votes since that incident happened. Um, but he's a guy who definitely, for me, is not going to be on the list. So
Yeah, no, I mean, even he has a over 400 career stolen bases as well. But yeah, like you said, especially with the off field issues, it's just it's very hard, with his counting stats, and then or with the the offensive profile he had, and then that the off field issues just to not be a good case for him at all. But the last guy that we actually have on the list that we're going to talk about is that reliever that we were mentioning a little while ago that is in that tier of one of the best relievers of all time, and that's Billy Wagner. A guy who has over 400 career saves at 422, almost 1,200 strikeouts, a 231 ERA. Um, as a reliever, he's one of the upper echelon of all time relievers, and one of the guys that was the most feared to face in the 90s and early 2000s.
yeah, so Billy Wagner's the guy who, out of all the relievers on this list, I would vote for because I mean he's in that upper. We talked about Joe Nathan, Papelbon, but this guy is in that other upper echelon. He's that little step above them. You know, and especially in consistency. I mean, you look at him, and outside of 2000, where he only pitched 27 innings and battled some injury, outside of that year, he didn't have an ERA over 3 in his entire career, even his last year, which was a 143 ERA at age 38 in 2010. He put up 24 wins above replacement for his career, which is very high up there for relievers. His 1999 season, he almost put up 4 WAR, which is crazy for a reliever. 11 strikeout or 11.9 strikeouts per nine, under 3 walks per nine for his career. Um, I mean, there's not too much to say about him. 422 saves. This guy definitely deserves to be a Hall of Famer. Um, he's definitely one of those upper tier relievers. He's closer to that Mariano Rivera slash, um, Goose Gossage slash Eckersley territory of reliever. Then he's closer to like the Papelbon and Joe Nathan and those and Francisco Rodriguez, some of those types of guys that will, of course, Francisco Rodriguez isn't on the ballot yet, but just kind of in general, Billy Wagner's definitely like on that higher level. He's on that next level, and I think he definitely should be in.
Yeah, he definitely should be in. And hopefully he gets a push more in the anonymous ballots. It's really hard for a reliever to get in, but I wish that some of these upper echelon relievers, especially like a Billy Wagner, would get more recognition. I think he's only right around like 48% of the votes right now. So hopefully he gets on some of the private ballots, gets a good push there. But just looking back at both of our ballots, we agree that Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Andrew Jones, David Ortiz, Scott Rowland, Billy Wagner, and Kurt Schilling. We all agree that those ones should be on your ballot, or on our ballot at least. And then we difference a little bit. I have Jeff Kent, A Rod, and Manny Ramirez is filling out mine. And Matt, you have Bobby Abreu, Sammy Sosa, and Gary Sheffield filling out your ballot.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of those ballots that there's such a backlog of players from the last several years with the steroid guys that are finally getting that, last year or two on the ballot. Like, this is the judgment day for them type stuff that it's going to hold back some players that probably should be. Because, I mean, I think that like Jeff Kent and, Andrew Jones and Scott Rowland and Bobby Abreu should all on that all have really good cases as well as Billy Wagner, but a lot of them are going to get left off because of the steroid guys that are in there last year and nobody really knows. So next year, I think we're going to start getting more of a clear answer on on some of these more have an argument but aren't shoe in type guys. But I think as it looks right now, Bonds and Clemens might actually get in this year, which is pretty good. And who was the other one you said had the support right now?
It's Bonds, Clemens, and Ortiz.
Ortiz.
Yeah.
Okay, so um, I'm
And
kind of surprised that a guy like Roland hasn't gotten in yet. Um, But
He's close behind. He's at
yeah,
about 69% right now.
yeah. Is this his last year?
No, I believe he's in his 5th year.
Okay, yeah. So Roland should get in. I think in a couple of years, Roland will get in. I do think that um, I do think that Andrew Jones gets in eventually. He's getting more and more support every year. Um, and I think a guy like a Billy Wagner maybe gets in. Once some of these guys drop off, the steroid guys that you're gonna get 10 picks in there. Next year there aren't a lot of first timers on the ballot that are going to be shoo-in Hall of Famers, so you might see more votes for guys like Wagner, Jeff Kent, who's going to be in his last year, Andrew, Roland, those types of guys. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I feel pretty good about both of our ballots. I mean, the arguments could be made for the guys we left off and the guys that we put on there that we disagreed with. Either way, I don't think either one of us are like, how can you possibly leave that guy off? Or how can you possibly put that guy on? It's kind of one of those like, I believe Jeff Kent probably should be a Hall of Famer, but, I picked 10 other guys. And you said probably Robbie Abreu's got a real good argument, but, I picked 10 other guys. So, you know,
Yeah, and it's the difference of the opinions of steroids, and what that kind of means to a player's Hall of Fame candidacy. Um, especially if they were caught during the game, or while they were still playing and suspended, which people are going to have all their different views of that as well. But like we said, there's a group of probably 15 people on this ballot, maybe even a couple more that probably should be Hall of Famers and won't get the recognition that they probably deserve, just because there's still a large contingent of people that are really hell bent, especially in the voting world, that a small ballot people, that you have people turning in blank ballots just because they see other people turning in 10 and they're just like, well, we just can't have that, or turning in one player ballots for some awful reason that for, I think one person, I don't remember who it was, like a Mark Burley or Jimmy Rollins only ballot or something. It's just something completely ridiculous, and does nothing to help the Hall of Fame voting at all.
yeah,
But
for sure. I've seen some of those, and I think that the blank ballots and those ballots are pretty ridiculous. But the one thing I will say is that, about the Hall of Fame in baseball is that I think that it's one of those things that some of the Hall of Fames have gotten really weighed down, really watered down. Like the Pro Football Hall of Fame, if you were a quarterback for a long time, you're going to be in, regardless of how good you actually were. Basketball Hall of Fame, it seems like just about everybody gets in. I think the Baseball Hall of Fame is one of those that's still kind of sacred, and I don't want to just let a bunch of people in who shouldn't be in. So I don't have a problem with some of the non-10 picks, but this year I think with the backlog of the potential PED user players, the steroid era players that haven't been voted for in the past several years, I think that there's a better argument for 10 guys this year. But there
yeah,
are
there,
times
there
I'd leave guys off. So
yeah, there doesn't need to be 10 every year. But in a year where you could look at there and say that probably is upwards of 15 people on the ballot that should be a Hall of Famer, for somebody to turn in a one or two player ballot, and not only that, but also make sure that it's publicized. Like right now, only 42.3% of all the ballots are known, and the vote is going to be announced on here in 4 days or 5 days, on January 18th. um, so to make sure that your ballot is public, or even if you put it out there but you make sure it's anonymous, like that does nothing at all. Just it's just an outcry for your name to get known or something. um, it just doesn't seem really right to me, or even fair or whatever. But next week we'll talk about more about who actually did make it, and the true numbers or candidacy behind those people. And then, um, did we say we were going to do a breakdown next week, or are we just going to
I
leave
think
that?
we'll decide next week. We'll look at who makes it and how long we're probably gonna last on the Hall of Fame next week, and maybe some potential CBA stuff too if there's any. But we'll probably do our second breakdown next week if I had to guess.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good. Hopefully we have CBA news so we can actually talk about that. But man, who knows?
Hopefully, we have CBA news so we can actually play baseball this year.
Hey, there's a thought, right? There's a what's that thing, the tweet that somebody Morosi put out today saying that Major League Baseball announced that in March they're gonna, or March 18th or 19th or something, they're gonna host a like Diamondbacks versus A's or something in Vegas, or I forgot what the actual matchup was, but it was spring training games in Las Vegas in March. Um, and I was like, "Are you sure? Like, are we gonna have that? Like, why did you announce that today?" But
Maybe MLB starting to look at, hey, we're trying to make a deadline, and this is what we want to be our deadline by, where we can play this game. Maybe
hopefully,
we can hope so.
hopefully Robbie Manfred is trying to tell us something for once. I highly doubt that, but anyways, thank you guys for listening to our Hall of Fame ballots, and hopefully we don't look too stupid and on come Tuesday when the ballots or the Hall of Fame inductions are actually announced. But
Hey, we
thank you
won't.
guys. Or good.
We won't. I was gonna say we won't look stupid. The Hall of Fame voters will look stupid.
Yeah,
We're the
yeah.
ones
You
that
guys
are
are
right.
stupid for not listening to us and putting our ballots in there. That's what I like. That one's better. So, anyways, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.